Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Before we begin, we wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application engagement tools you can use. All the engagement tools are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. We will be launching poll questions throughout the webinar. If your slide area is maximized to full screen, it may cover the poll question, so please be mindful of that. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit them through the Q&A engagement tool. We will try our best to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Additional help materials are available in the resource list. We encourage you to download any resources or links that you might find useful. As mentioned, our webinar does include polling questions, and we encourage your participation. To receive your CPE certificate through DLA, please reach out to Catherine Lungo at DLA upon conclusion of the webinar. Her contact information was included in the reminder emails and will be included in the email with the on-demand version of the webcast that will be available shortly after we conclude. I'll now pass it over to Erkan Murad.
Great, thank you. Good morning all, and welcome to the Mastering End BDC Operations webinar. My name is Erkan Murad, and I'm a partner at DLA, which is an internal audit and accounting advisory firm where we serve just about 50 BDCs as their SOX compliance function. I'm joined by my colleague, Spencer Javras, and our friends at SS&C. With that, I'll pass it over to Spencer to introduce himself.
Good morning. My name is Spencer Javras. I'm a director at DLA working in the internal audit group. I'll pass it over to Matt and Nadine.
Thank you. Matt Folks. I'm a senior director at SS&C, focusing on BDCs. I've been in the BDC space for about the last 13 years, based out of Boston. Very nice to be here. Nadine?
Yes, hi, good morning. Nadine Samuels, New York State CPA. I'm also at SS&C. I'm a senior director. I also head up the BDC team alongside Matt. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Great. Thank you, everyone. As you see, our main topics to cover today are fund administrators selection considerations, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act as it relates to BDCs, as well as some common pitfalls that our clients may face. That being said, I'll pass it over to Matt, who will start us off for the morning.
Thank you. Next slide. So I think we want to talk about what the role of the fund administrator is in the BDC. And I think first and foremost, the administrator is there to handle the books and records on a daily basis. Very simply keep cash and positions in line, work with you to resolve any open items or breaks, help the client get through the quarter end process, right? So, and that's probably their biggest lift. So we talk about the quarter end, it's getting everyone on the same page for the production calendar, key dates with the evaluations and board meetings, and then ultimately walking through the NAV, the sign off, into the production of the 10Q or K, depending on the period, and then working with your auditor and legal counsel to ensure any comments or questions as they go through the review are addressed in the draft, the proper support is provided, and hopefully working side by side with the advisor on the fund to make sure that it's a smooth process. Everyone's getting the information timely. The board isn't coming back saying they were rushed, so they didn't have enough time to get through the queue. And then I think it also, as you move forward and managers are growing, working with an administrator is someone there. It's really an extension of your office. We want to work as a partner with you. So we're there really from a consultative approach as well. SS&C, a larger firm, we see a lot of things in the market. So if you're getting into a new investment, a new structure, a new entity, maybe something that's new to your firm, but is out there in the space, there's a good chance that if it's not myself and Nadine, there's someone that we work with, right? So you really want to be able to rely on your administrator as to the extension of your office. And then, when you have questions, obviously you have your other service providers you can reach out to, whether it's your auditors or your legal counsel. But I think also from an operational standpoint, being able to rely on your fund administrator and maybe talk through a solution, that fits right for your fund and the type of information you're trying to, look into receiving. So I think those are really the two key roles is really that day-to-day, handle the operations, handle the heavy lifting, and then be able to provide the information to the clients in a manner that they can consume, maybe for other downstream reporting that they're handling, but also in a clear and concise manner so their auditors can get through their review timely. And then from that consultative approach, things come up, all the time. It could be a quick question like, hey, I don't, who I need to ask, but you already have a call with the administrators, let me bring it up on that call. So I think that's really what, our role as the administrators there. It's the extension of your office to really help you get through the day-to-day and the minutia that is required. I think when it comes to choosing the right administrator, there's a few things you need to decide first. Maybe you're a new advisor in the space. Your track record is really on the deal side, and you never really dealt with the administration or the outsourcing of it. So you need to make a determination: do I want to do this in-house? Do I have the size, the scale to do that, or do I really want to focus on where my value add is, and maybe that's on the deals and in the lending space. So you're better off hiring a CFO to then sort of manage the outsourcing rather than build out a staff. So I think that's usually the first step most people need to determine. And it's not one size fits all. It's going to be different for every advisor. So I think understanding what goes into it, are there additional costs with the staff, with leasing the technology that it doesn't make sense for you to do that, then outsourcing really probably is the right approach. If you already have some of that built in, and it's really just adding the right staff to focus on it, the other costs you've already covered, maybe that's the way you want to go. And then I think if you do come to the decision, okay, in-house is not the way that we want to do it, and we do want to go to a third-party administrator, I think there is that conversation that needs to happen internally. Again, what are we looking for from the administrator? I think it's not one size fits all, because there may be, again, small versus larger advisor. There may be, you may have an OMS system. You can push trades over to your administrator, but you need information back so you can build out your internal data warehouse for all the downstream reporting you need, versus, maybe I'm a smaller shop. Really don't have a data warehouse. This is our one fund, and I'm really just trying to get through this as we go to build out and grow our business. So you may not need all the technological advantages a larger administrator is going to have, but you are going to need someone to be able to get you through the books and records that you can lean on when you're trying to get through this process. So I think internally, it's that discussion: am I doing in-house? Am I doing outsourcing? And when you get to the outsourcing, so whether you go through an RFP process or you just sort of put it out there through a few different contacts, you want to find the administrator that can work with you and will meet your needs. Are they able to offer flexible solutions? Can they grow with you as your business grows? Understanding what their technology is and how do they use it. How is that going to better serve you? Where does their process end and then yours picks up in the review process? So I think it's a very unique conversation. As Erica and Spencer can attest to, as they speak to their different clients, I'm sure all of them have a different solution in terms of how they leverage them. So again, it's really understanding as the advisor, what do I want to do? How do I find a partner that can fit in with my model, and then move forward? Because the worst thing that can happen is, you pick the wrong administrator, and the process and the services don't line up with what your expectations is. And then both sides sort of are now, everyone's working more and longer hours than they should have. So I think as we think about that, those are the big questions you need to have. Just saying, hey, I'm just going to pick an administrator, right? When you realize we're involved in your day-to-day, we're here with you, at least speaking once a week. We're going through your transactions. If you're publicly listed, it's a quarterly NAV. We're seeing a lot of, the non-traded with the monthly close. So there's a lot of communication, a lot of reporting going back and forth. So I think these are very key decisions to make, and ensuring you choose the right administrator will definitely help your overall process and not cause a strain on something that a lot of people look at it like, look, if we're going to go in and do the basic books and records, cash position reconciliations, and produce consistent and clean reporting, That's one piece, but then how you're communicating and how you interact with your administrator is also a key factor. So I think we have received a question in terms of, the type of reporting we provide our clients and the auditors versus, what are we providing to our, internal audit team when they're coming through. And I think from the standpoint, it's usually one and the same, right? Like whatever our internal audit team is coming in and requesting to review as they're going through, the SOX review on an annual basis, it's the same reporting package we're giving to our clients and we're giving to the auditors. So I think those are things and I think Nadine's going to really kind of speak into that a little bit more, but what we're doing, it's very consistent. It's one package for internal audit and it's a different package for a client. It's consistent. Like what we give clients is based off of, what our SOC 1 and our internal audit says that we're providing. So I didn't see any questions at this point, so I may pass this over to Nadine to kind of take us in through the operational and financial reporting needs.
Oh, great. Thank you, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, I will talk a little bit about the operational and financial reporting needs. I'm going to start with actually combining point 1 and 3. So the importance of timely and accurate investor reporting, as well as the ongoing audits and financial checks. So the investment advisor will either require a monthly or quarterly financial reporting. But as to be expected, the investors and regulators want ever-increasing more data transparency as well as faster turnaround times for both formal reporting, which would be what the quarterly requirement is to the SEC, but if they decide to also cut a monthly NAV. And the investors are requesting timely and accurate information because they want to obviously know the performance of the fund, but also what is their NAV per share. The SEC wants to ensure that the investment managers are meeting their fiduciary requirements to its investors and also adhering to the formal reporting requirements of a BDC. So monthly NAV, just a little bit on timing. If the investment manager is doing so, they'll usually, the fund administrator will support them and cut that NAV somewhere around 10, 24 days after the month end. While on a quarterly basis, to file with the SEC, the first 3 quarters, when you're filing your 10Qs, those need to be filed within 45 days for the first 3 quarters of the year. But on an annual basis, the requirement is a little bit longer. It will go to 75 to 90 days, depending on the type of filer, accelerated, non-accelerated, etc. So as you're running a BDC, to be effective operationally, the fund administrator must be really knowledgeable about all the SEC requirements, but also have a strong operational framework to handle these complex transactions. They need to have a team that's also knowledgeable and has expertise to prepare those long, complicated SEC filers, those 10Ks and those 10Q reports. The administrator has staff that have breadth and depth of experience in private markets, a little bit of credit, a lot of the BDC hold loans, how to unitize funds. These are hybrid structures, etc. So the takeaway here is the staff has to have the right expertise, but the fund administrator must also be supported by the right technology in a strong control environment and have standard processes in place to meet the complex reporting requirements. Next, I will touch a little bit on how the investment advisor in the BDC handles their ongoing liquidity, investor capital, as well as their ongoing liquidity requirements as they're running the funds. And this changes that generally based on whether the BDC is private, publicly traded, or non-traded. So a private BDC generally looks more like a traditional capital call model that you would see in a private equity fund. So if investments need to be funded, those monies would come from capital calls or drawdowns from the investors that are in the BDC. If the BDC is publicly traded, it's likely that that BDC will have some portion of the overall portfolio in liquid assets, again, to have the funds available to fund deals. And lastly, if it's a non-traded BDC, we're seeing that those are continually offered structured, so the funds would be available on an ongoing basis to fund deals. Pause there. So the last area I want to touch on today is the importance of SOC 1 reports, or service organizational control reports. It's the SOC stands for, SOC 1. So a SOC 1 is an examination of controls at the service organization, and in this case would be the fund administrator. All the strong fund administrators in the market will have a SOC 1 that will support, obviously, their BDC business, but their entire business and all that they provide to the market. And that report will provide very detailed explanation of all the internal controls in place at that fund administrator to ensure that transaction processing is done accurately, accounting and reporting. There's also other reports that would cover, say, IT security and business continuity that are in place as well. And in a SOC 1 environment, the stated controls would most likely be audited by an external firm. And this is great for the clients as well, because the existence of that SOC 1 at the fund administrator, which is also an audited process, right, is really good business, but it also helps to build trust with the clients, because it will provide evidence of the strong controls that that firm has to and are using day to day to run the BDC effectively. Lastly, last little point I want to make about the SOC report is that the external auditors of the fund will also use the SOC report of the fund administrator during their audit process. And as well, one other point is that the BDC firm will also use the fund administrator's SOC report to help with their own internal compliance requirements. So it's really very high value. And it's a report that's available and usually distributed to not only the clients, but also the clients' additional service providers. So I'll pause there and pass to DLA to continue talking about controls.
Nadine, a quick question there.
Sure.
What's SS&C's process for communicating the SOC 1 report to their clients, and what's the time frame that it typically covers?
Sure. So the SOC report, I know for our firm, covers a year, but the audit is done in September. And so what that does is it creates a gap between September, when that audit is complete, and when our clients will need that report, which is usually somewhere around December of the year. So we share that audit report through, say, September 30th, when it becomes available. But then it has to be accompanied by what's called a bridge letter to cover the period from when the audit is complete until those additional 3 months until 12/31, when the traditional financial statement audits are prepared. We have a very controlled environment where we share that report. It's requested. There is a formal list of who can receive the report, and it gets sent out and tracked. And once the client and whoever they designate to also receive the report receives it on an annual basis, they will do so. We will send it on a go-forward basis.
Great, thanks.
Yep, thank you. Not sure if there's anything else. So I think, if there's any questions, please, hold them, and we certainly have time at the end to answer questions that you all may have. Thank you. So I think I now pass to DLA to talk about SOX.
Yeah, and before that, yeah, go ahead, Matt. I know we're gonna get into the first polling question here, so I'll let you take that.
A little ahead of myself. Thank you.
So which area of fund administration is your organization most focused on building out? Is it cash management and reconciliations, reporting and financial statement preparation, compliance and regulatory filings, internal controls, and risk management. So we'll give everyone a minute for that. Again, I think this is going to come down to personal experience, right? If you've been in a firm that's had a good administrator and maybe you didn't have a great compliance program and you had issues with it, then that's going to be a concern, versus vice versa. If you have a firm whose compliance program has traditionally been strong, but maybe you've had issues with administrators and you're not getting timely cash, in position reconciliations, and it's caused delays in reporting, then that could be your focus. So I'm interested to see how it comes out.
Yeah, and I think all of these answers kind of go hand in hand with one another. It's from our perspective, it's not one or the other. They're all part of the overall environment and overall compliance function. So, it really is. It's all four of them here.
Shows about right. All right.
Cash reps. Always cash is king.
Cash is king.
All right. So as Nadine mentioned, I'm going to be talking about Sarbanes-Oxley Act over the next couple of slides, and then from there moving into ICFR, internal control over financial reporting, and then we'll tie that all in at the end as far as how internal audit plays a role, how the fund administrator plays a role, and how even external auditors play a role in ensuring that the organization is SOX compliant. So best place to start is, what is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act? The Act is a federal law that was passed in 2002 as a result of several high-profile accounting scandals, really stemming from executive management fraud and malpractice. So as a result, the Act basically establishes additional, stipulations for management as far as criminal punishment goes. It establishes additional accounting regulation and investor protections, and then also, establishes a requirement for strong corporate responsibility and governance, in addition to some hefty penalties to the extent there are any intentional fraudulent acts. So what does this mean for management? There's an increased onus on management to ensure that their financial reports are complete, accurate, reliable, transparent, and there are a number of certifications, which I'll talk through on the next couple of slides, that management is required to include in their quarterly and annual financial reports. They are required to certify that they have a control environment that is properly designed to detect and prevent fraud and material misstatements in their financial reports. And they're also responsible for ensuring that there's sufficient evidence retained to support proper review and assurance that their financial reports were reviewed and are reliable. They're also responsible for organizing these documents in a way that can be provided to their internal audit team, external audit team, for audit purposes. And then moving on to the internal audit's responsibilities, internal audit did play a significant role in uncovering some of the fraudulent activity in 2002 within these scandals. So as part of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, their roles and responsibilities have expanded to really assist management with the design and operating effectiveness testing of their internal controls to help management detect any material misstatements. As part of that process, internal audit also tests the control environment throughout the year to ensure that the control environment was properly implemented and is operating effectively. In addition to the increased responsibilities for management and internal audit, there were additional regulatory bodies established, specifically the PCAOB, and the PCAOB is overseen by the SEC, and then the PCAOB oversees all of the audits from performed by the external auditors. Moving to the next slide. So within the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, there are 11 different sections, and then within each section there are subsections. So what we've included here are really the primary, I would consider most important sections. So just to start, Section 302 is a personal certification by the CEO and CFO of the company, basically certifying that the financial reports are fairly presented. This is a certification that is included in the quarterly and annual financial reports signed by the CEO and CFO. For Section 409 really is primarily geared towards ensuring that management is distributing timely information, almost real-time information through 8Ks and other filings, just to provide additional transparency to investors to the extent there's any changes in business operations or financial status. Section 906 is a more criminal provision, basically another certification that goes into the quarterly and annual reports, really certifying that executive management is not aware of any fraudulent activity. And then there are penalties and such associated with this section to the extent any fraudulent activity is uncovered. And then I saved the best for last, Section 404, which is where Erkan and I spend the majority of our time with our clients. And this is really the certification over the organization's internal control environment. Basically, this is management ensuring that they have established and designed a internal control environment, and that internal control environment is operating effectively. So all sections within that are covered within the quarterly and annual financial reports. And then moving to the next slide, Section 404 is broken down even further. So for public companies that are require 404A compliance, 404A is really just management's assertion that their internal control over financial reporting is designed and operating effectively. There is no external auditor opinion required on the control environment under Section 404A. Under Section 404B, in addition to management's assertion over internal control over financial reporting, there is an external auditor opinion required over the control environment. The requirements under 404B are definitely more robust and more stringent, and clients definitely have an increased requirement to provide sufficient documentation around the operation of their control environment. And just to point out here, the difference between the requirements for 404A and 404B is really public float. So typically any public companies with a public float of 75 million or higher require the 404B assertions.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we talked about 404A and 404B, and B really being, the additional requirement of the external auditor to provide their opinion. Both A and B require the CEO and CFO to certify to the effectiveness of their internal control environment. And these are actually put into the Qs and the Ks. So it's one thing to say that, yes, sure, our internal control environment is robust, but it's also another to actually certify in public filing that it is as such. So an important distinction there.
Right, and that really puts the onus on management to ensure that all of these things are designed and operating correctly, and to the extent that there's any known fraud or malpractice, that is disclosed as well, because there are hefty fines and penalties, and we'll get into this later, but even reputational risks involved with any of that. So
that's right.
With that, I believe we're moving into the next polling question. So how would you describe your organization's approach to SOX compliance? Very similar to the previous question. This is really going to depend on where the company is with their operations, right? So has the fund launched? You may not even be thinking about SOX at that point. As the fund launched, and now you're gearing up operations, so maybe you're starting to think more about SOX. I think Erkan and I would argue that it's never too early to think about SOX and get the process started, depending on what operations are in place. Some may be further along than others, and we'll get into that on the next slide. But this is really just dependent on where an entity is in their operations.
Yeah, and one thing to note, you are actually exempt from 404 for the filing of your first K. So if you are a BDC that has filed during the year 12/31, you are exempt from a 404 compliance perspective. However, it is in that next year and that next K that those certifications do begin. So a little bit of a reprieve and a break from SOX for that first year, but it does kick in for the second.
That's a good point. Thanks, Erkan.
Good.
All right, we'll give everybody a couple seconds to answer this, and then we'll move to the next section. Oh,
wow,
pretty mixed reviews. Yeah,
some pretty even math there. Yeah, Spencer, I don't know what your thoughts are here.
Yeah, no, I think this is interesting. So definitely looks like we have a diverse group on the call listening in. So this is good to know. All right, now moving into the next section. So over the course of the last few slides, I said, internal control over financial reporting a number of times. So what does that actually mean? The best way to think about internal control over financial reporting is the policies, procedures within an organization that ensure the accuracy, reliability, integrity over the financial statements. Sometimes these are documented in process flow charts. Sometimes these are documented in process narratives. All of these provide a reasonable assurance that just to qualify there, reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, that the financial reports are complete, accurate, and reliable. With the internal controls, these are aimed at detecting and preventing any misstatements that could arise from fraud and error. There's a heavy emphasis on management's review. There's a heavy emphasis on segregation of duties, just to ensure that there are multiple layers of review in anything that flows into the financial statements. Really just to ensure that there's more integrity going into the financial statements, and that all the information is reliable for investors. In addition to ensuring completeness and accuracy of financial statements, there are a number of other added benefits to a strong internal control over financial reporting. One of which is increased efficiency and effectiveness. Quite often when you're putting controls in place, controls may help identify inefficiencies or redundancies in operations. And, through the building out of a control environment, those get eliminated and things become more efficient. Safeguarding of assets, and like I mentioned, this is kind of achieved through additional segregation of duties. This multiple eyes reviewing things eliminates the potential for fraud or error. And, in addition, it's going to allow the organization to comply with all of the, requisite laws and regulations, specifically SOX in this case, considering that appropriate ICFR is one of the key components of SOX. In addition to all of the items mentioned here, the ICFR and the documentation included helps clients and companies prepare themselves for external audits. A robust ICFR will allow for the proper documentation to be provided to external auditors when it comes time for them to audit the Qs in the case. And then in addition, like I mentioned, all of these are certified and attested to within the financial statements. So it does provide investors a level of confidence that the information that they are using for their decisions is complete, accurate, and reliable.
And then Spencer, really fast there, that's actually what we see in the space, that's actually one of the main reasons why investors choose the BDC platform. Why choose a BDC versus a private fund, right? And it is these assurances, these robust requirements required by SOX that give those investors that added assurance.
Yeah, thanks, Erkan. And then moving to the last slide, just to tie everything in. So how does a BDC, how does a public company ensure SOX compliant financial reporting structuring? So I know I've hit on a number of these items, but just to talk through number one specifically, right? Establishing a board of directors, really, and as part of the board of directors, an audit committee of the board of directors. This will ensure oversight over the financial reporting process, over external audits, over internal audit, really making sure that there's a independent oversight over all of these functions within the organization, and some tone at the top. In addition, an organization can establish or will have to establish a strong code of ethics, and that goes to the tone at the top, and that trickles out throughout the organization. So a strong code of ethics, and then establishing a whistleblower function as well, right? So that will allow any outside parties or internal parties to report any potential fraudulent activity or questionable activity. For number three, establishing an internal audit function, very key as far as reviewing the internal control over financial reporting, design, and effectiveness. So this is where Erkan and myself would come in, and we do a lot of work around the design and operating effectiveness, and that may be a matter of enhancing existing controls, building out control frameworks from scratch, even assessing what an organization currently has in place and tweaking it from there. Our expertise is just in looking at an organization holistically, seeing what's in place, and then tweaking it to ensure that organization is SOX compliant. That's really the goal at the end of the day. And engaging a knowledgeable administrator and external auditor. So Matt and Nadine covered this earlier, the importance of ensuring that other third parties know the business, know the organization's needs, and can help the organization comply with SOX, undergo smooth reporting processes, all key portions to get to that end goal of being SOX compliant and successfully filing financial statements. And just to cover the number 7, which is also another key piece, ensuring that BDCs remain compliant. So there are a number of controls that Erkan and I will put in place that ensure that companies are staying within the SEC guidelines, and that's any BDC distribution requirements, income requirements, asset requirements, and then asset diversification requirements. These are all critical parts in ensuring sound financial statements and maintaining that BDC status. With that, I will be passing it over to Erkan, who will be talking through some challenges and best practices.
Spencer,
Great.
Erkan,
Yep.
before we jump into that, I was just gonna say, when you're building that framework with your clients, I guess, where does the administrator's SOC 1 report sort of fit in with all that? Like, how do you view it? Is it a building block or just a piece of it, or?
Sure, Matt. So we view it as very much complementary to the control environment being built out with management. You can't look at just controls at management without assessing invariably the books and records, right? So, you know, the SOC 1 report and the controls that are tagged as key within that SOC 1 report are absolutely paramount when looking at the control environment in totality. A lot of those key reports and a lot of those key controls are heavily relied upon, and you know, it's really important that our clients choose the right administrator that has all those key reports and understands the business and understands the challenges that they face. So it's incredibly important.
Thank you.
Sure. So thanks, Spencer, for that. You know, moving on to some challenges that BDCs could face, and especially those that are a little bit smaller, or maybe they have just formed. You know, just taking through what we have here. You know, limited resources. You know, there's definitely challenges at the start. You know, you could have people wearing multiple hats, and you know, there's certainly the cost of external audits, the cost of hiring an outsourced internal audit in the early going, and internal control assessments. That's certainly something to take into consideration. You know, some potential solutions there could be, again, outsourcing your fund administrator and compliance functions, and maybe even just taking a phased approach to SOX compliance. Start with ensuring your financial reporting and basic internal controls are in place before you start tackling more complex and nuanced areas. Next, you know, building an adequate ICFR, an internal control framework. Again, you know, lack of infrastructure and processes and staff could be a pitfall and a challenge when you're trying to build out that framework. So, you know, again, a solution here could be simplifying those internal controls, leveraging any sort of best practices and templates that are out there. You know, certainly our clients come to us with that question. Invariably, you hear, what's the peer group doing? What are best practices? What have you seen in the space? And we can certainly leverage what we've seen at our other clients to assist any new ones as they get their framework up and running. And then, you know, I think obviously outsourcing your internal audit function. If you're a smaller or newly formed BDC, you know, not having to worry about internal audit and outsourcing that is definitely a good idea from my perspective. And now, next, you know, moving over to material weaknesses or deficiencies and controls. You know, nobody wants that, right? Again, if you're smaller and you have segregation of duties issues, and unfortunately, sometimes that can rise to the level of a significant deficiency or a material weakness, and that's obviously never good. So, you know, struggling to implement and document that range of controls required by SOX could lead to higher risk. And, you know, for significant deficiency, that's something that needs to be reported to the audit committee, which, you know, is obviously not a good communication to make. And in the case of a material weakness, that goes straight into your financial statements. And so, you know, you don't want to be in a position where you have an SD or an MW. So what do you do if you're a smaller BDC or newly formed BDC? Like I said, implement those key controls first, right? Make sure that you're covering those big ticket items, and make sure that there's no breakdown there. And then, you know, regular monitoring and reviews of those controls. You know, that's something that Spencer and I perform for our clients consistently. You know, not just taking a look at those controls at year end, but assessing in Q1 and Q2 and Q3, and assessing the control environment in a phased approach. And what that allows, given that runway, is the ability to address any deficiencies or weaknesses that come up. If you have a weakness or a deficiency in Q1, you want to be able to remediate in Q2 and refine that process moving forward. And so I think that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're one of these smaller shops that maybe don't have the bandwidth internally. Going to an outsourced resource there is probably ideal. And then for the auditor attestation, Spencer touched on this before. 404A is management's assertion, and 404B is essentially the opinion of the external auditor. And when you flip that switch, there is certainly a difference in the documentation that's required and the evidence of your reviews and all of these buzzwords and key ticket items that go hand in hand with a 404B opinion. And so that, again, that can be time consuming. It could be expensive. A lot of folks can't dedicate that amount of time just to the SOX opinion portion of their Q and K. They have a job to do readying the financials. And so, again, that's where we would come in and assist with that function. Some solutions there could be, again, outsourcing your internal audit, but early engagement with your auditors. If you know that you are going to be 404B in the coming months or years, start having those discussions with your external auditors. Talk to them about what's required. Talk to them about sort of what are the what's the evidence and what are the documentation requirements of a 404B opinion, and try to hash those concerns out with them in the onset. And then, implementing a cost-effective audit program could also be ideal for a 404B. Again, if you're smaller and you're just forming and you want to get ready for a 404B opinion down the road, having those building blocks in place early on, where it's more of a nuanced change year over year as opposed to a grand scale change for 404B, that's definitely a wise approach to take. And then again, we touched on it, but maintaining ongoing SOX compliance. You want to be able to make sure that your compliance is ongoing and up to date throughout the year. Stay on top of any regulatory changes. The PCAOB keeps everybody employed, and they're constantly putting out guidance and tweaking requirements for controls and for SOX. And so those invariably get pushed to our clients through the external audit firms. Partnering with an internal audit function that is on top of those changes and sees these changes being pushed through and is able to address them with you is definitely key. And maintaining sort of this compliance culture is definitely important. Spencer and I spend a lot of time with our clients just in an education and a training perspective, making sure that our clients understand the importance and making sure that they are up to date on any changes in the environment. We can move on to the. Yep.
Yeah, and Erkan, just to jump in on that last point, right? Really, organizations should be using internal audit as the sounding board, right, for any requirements, and passing their ideas through internal audit potentially before some of their documentation or support or controls make their way through to the external auditors. We like Matt said, just as the fund admins are the partners with their clients, we're partners with our clients as well. And, we love it when our clients come to us with questions before going to external auditors, just to hash things out and talk things through. And, just to see that they're paying attention to all the requirements that they have to follow.
Yeah, that's right, Spencer. Sure. So if we move on to the next slide, here's some best practices for SOX compliance, and we touched on a number of these things already. So I'll go through these fairly quick, but establishing a strong governance framework, you might want to have, depending upon the size of your organization, either a CCO or a CFO oversee those compliance efforts, and making sure that management and IA are updating the board and the audit committee as they go through the year. And then, regularly perform risk and control environment assessments. This is somewhat standard, but use a risk-based approach, prioritize those high-risk areas, high-risk controls. This is the valuation processes of the world, right? That's always a significant risk, and something that not only is the audit committee and board always on top of, but our external audit friends always look at valuation as a high-risk area. Implement financial reporting controls. That's probably, if not right there with valuation, maybe just a step, just a touch under that. And that's where the importance of SS&C comes into play, and your fund administrator making sure that SOC 1 report is unqualified, and making sure that you can rely on reporting from a financial reporting perspective, and then just documenting all of those controls that ultimately lead to filing the Q and the K. And then number 4, ensure compliance with SOX with Sarbanes-Oxley. We've been talking about this for the large portion of the webinar. Get those checklists, get those processes documented and finalized so that you can comply with 404A and 404B. Policies and procedures, again, those go hand in hand with what we just mentioned for SOX. You want to make sure that you have a set policy in place that's reviewed and approved, and then that you're consistently applying that policy across all of your processes. Employee training and awareness, again, touched on that a little bit before, making sure that your employees understand the importance of the internal control framework and Sarbanes-Oxley, and they're saving down emails where they're reviewing documents, and they're able to provide that evidence to the external auditors in a 404B opinion. It's just getting into the habit of becoming SOX compliant. Continuously monitoring and improving the control effectiveness and compliance. Again, this is, taking a phased approach and taking a look at your environment year over year, and addressing any changes and requirements that get pushed through the PCAOB, and making sure that you are up to date on all of those requirements that come through. And then, managing your external relationships. I think that this is very important, right? You want to make sure that you're in constant communication with your internal audit function. Maybe there was a change in a process and you want to run it by them. To Spencer's point, keeping internal audit in the loop before pushing out any changes, before the external auditors jump in. Part of that relationship is making sure that you have a close relationship with your external auditors, and that your IA function has a close relationship with the external auditors as well, so that you can talk through any differences and talk through any changes that come through, just to make sure that you're still SOX compliant as you move forward. So definitely relationship management probably at the top of this list. That being said, moving on, we've got another CPE question here. What is your biggest goal regarding fund administration and SOX compliance in the next 12 months? You could have probably more than 4 options to choose from here, but streamlining processes and improving efficiencies. I think that again, having that SOC 1 report come from the fund admins and making sure that you can rely on an unqualified report year over year probably makes a lot of sense here. Reducing compliance risk and avoiding penalties. Going to an outsourced internal audit function, making sure that you are in compliance with SOX, and making sure that you can stand behind those certifications, for the Qs and the Ks, definitely paramount. Enhancing reporting accuracy and transparency. Again, one of the key components of becoming a BDC is transparent reporting to investors. They love the structure of a BDC because there is essentially very clear, as Spencer mentioned earlier, requirements to maintain BDC status, whether it's your distribution requirements or your asset diversification or what have you. And then, improving internal communication and collaboration. Every client of ours works hand in hand with one another, whether it's the valuation team, whether it's the operations team, obviously the finance accounting team are paramount. And at times even the deal team gets involved with SOX, which, is again, speaks to the number of folks that are required to help with SOX. So here we go. It seems that everyone wants to improve efficiencies. No surprise there. Streamline processes. How can fund administrators and your outsourced IA function help you make your life easier? I think that's what everyone is getting at here, and no surprises there. So that being said, we're going to move on to some common challenges that our clients face, and I'll pass it back over to the team at SS&C to discuss.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think some of the common challenges we see are, you don't understand what your internal process and how your reporting is going to work at the advisor side. So you don't, choose the right administrator who's going to be able to create a flexible operating model and solution for you. And it just leads to, larger headaches. Your staff, the administrative staff, both are working extra hours. Worst case scenario, you end up, having to do a conversion out to someone else. Now your team is basically running the fund twice with the existing and the new. So really taking the time to do the due diligence, get to understand the operating model at the administrator, I think can help avoid that headache. I think, Spencer and Eric, and you both mentioned as well, like if the new advisors just aren't staffed properly, it's really understanding how do you leverage your service providers to really be able to do their job and give you the right reporting, and help you build out the framework internally. But to your point, we do often see folks wearing the CFO hat, wearing a CCO hat. Maybe that's not their background, but they're learning on the fly. So those are definitely challenges we see some of our clients face. And then also, I think, you may see it, most of the larger administrators are going to have, unqualified SOC 1, no issues. You may go to a smaller admin and maybe the fees, they're not charging you as much, but the flip side is going to be now your audit firm, gave you an engagement letter, and then when they see the SOC 1, the engagement letter is now double, right? The amount of testing that they're required to do. So it's, you think you may be saving money, but really you need to understand sort of that full process of how everyone fits together. So those are some of the challenges we see when it comes to the administrator and operational oversight. I think and I apologize, are we in a polling question next, or are we handing it over to? So question, what support or resources would be most beneficial to help your organization establish stronger fund administration and SOX compliance frameworks? External consultants or advisors, automated software solutions, staff training and development, templates, guides, or industry best practices. I think this is probably similar to the last question. There could be more choice in this, but I think these four are probably the four that we're hearing from our clients. Like, how can we help with automation and software solutions? And then, are there any sort of templates or just things you can do to standardize and help their internal process? I don't know, Erkan or Spencer, if you guys are seeing anything else.
No, from our side, it's always deep. It seems everyone, and that's something that we love to tell our clients. We don't want you recreating the wheel. We work with a number of peers in the space and kind of know what the external auditors focus on and what best practices are. So always looking to make everyone's life easier.
Mm-hmm. Agree. Give it
There you go.
Yep.
Automated software and templates and guides. Again, I think in line with the answers that we received earlier, everyone wants to make their life easier, and how can we make our lives easier and not have a second job? That's definitely at the top of everyone's mind. So obviously automating your software so that you're not doing anything manually and being provided with best practices is always paramount. That being said, moving on to the end of our webinar here, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. I know that there were a couple of questions in the chat, and we're just so engrossed in fund administration and in SOX that we could not get to them. However, feel free to email any of the four of us, and we are happy to answer those questions or any other questions that you may have. So once again, really appreciate everybody joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. And just a reminder for everyone, the recording will be available shortly after the webinar with contact information at DLA to receive your CPE credits. And thank you again for joining us.